Testing 1, 2.
Okay, shall we begin? Are you guys ready? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to Populi Center. I'm Ratri Istania, Senior Researcher at Populi Center, and also I'm an Associate Professor at Polytechnic Estayalan, Jakarta. So it is my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion. We are going to discuss about the presence of Trump and its impact for Indonesia. So for those audience in here, and also we have audience in the Zoom, and you can always access our YouTube channels as well. So this forum aims to explore how Donald Trump's presidency and political influence that have affected Indonesia's foreign policy, economy, society, politics, and support for democracy. This event sponsored by Klangen Coffee. Trump's America's First policy redefined U.S. foreign relations, including with Southeast Asia and Indonesia. His trade war, tariffs war, security strategies, and populist rhetoric shaped both global and domestic political landscape. Even today, Trumpism continues to influence U.S. political dynamic with potential ripple effect on Indonesia's economy, democracy, and international relations. Trump executive orders, 36 issues on the very first week of his presidency, stirred controversies, and then Department of Government Efficiency or DOGE continued to push major changes in how a president as an executive challenges, contests the separations of power doctrine. So our discussion will address a couple things. First, how did Trump policies impact Indonesia's strategic position? Then what economic and geopolitical shifts emerge? And what lessons can Indonesia learn from the Trump era? Here we have our distinguished panelists. We are honored to have you, Dr. Eric Jones, Associate Professor of Southeast Asian Studies from Northern Illinois Universities. Thank you for coming. Dr. Amanda Durik, Associate Professor of Social Psychology from Northern Illinois University. And our very own Dr. Afri Madonna, Executive Director of Populi Center. He's an expert in foreign policy analysis. And we are still waiting for Dr. Philip Sermonte. Hopefully he's on his way here. He's a spokesperson for the Presidential Communications Office and Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences from Indonesian International Islamic Universities, or UIII. So ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to read the short bio of these three speakers. First, Dr. Eric Allen Jones. So he's an associate professor in the Department of History at NIU. Beyond his teaching role, Dr. Jones served as the executive director of Global Initiative at NIU. Is that correct? And is a faculty associate of the Center for Southeast Asian Study. So Dr. Jones has an extensive engagement with numerous high-profile Indonesian political and government figures, including former presidents and current ministries, of course. His involvement to promote understanding between academic institutions and governments are very extensive. And then Dr. Amanda Durik, her research focus in social and personality psychology, particularly intrinsic motivation, interest, and achievement motivation. I got it from the website, I'm sorry. So Dr. Durik has an extensive publication record with her work being cited over 7,600 times. In addition to her academic responsibilities, Dr. Durik served as the Associate Dean in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at NIU. Recently, she assumes the interim role of Director of CLAS Advising, demonstrating her commitment to the university community. And then Dr. Afri Madonna. So he earned his PhD in political science from Northern Illinois University. So all Northern Illinois universities come here. I'm the only one who's not. So, so Dr. Afri Madonna holds an MA in International Relations from the Australian National University. And currently, he serves as a lecturer at the Universitas Islam International Indonesia, UIII, and also holds a teaching position in the International Relations Study Program at Universitas Pembangunan Nasional, or UPN Veteran Jakarta. His focus is teaching political science and international relations. Dr. Afri Madonna has published works in various academic journals, with one of his notable publications is Revisiting Political Polarizations in Indonesia, a case study of Jakarta's electorate, which examines ideological divisions among Jakarta voters and their impact on political alignment. So Dr. Philip Sermonte will be coming soon. I will read his bio later. Okay, so shall we start our discussions? So here we go. So each of you will have like 20 minutes to speak freely. This is academic kind of like environment that we try to build in here. So everybody's feel free to say things according to the topic. So I will begin with you, Dr. Eric Jones. I would like you to tell us, the audience, either here and hopefully there are some also in the screens coming from abroad, because I heard they are paying attention about this kind of like dynamic. So from your expertise studying about history, how would you situate Trump's foreign policy approach toward Indonesia compared to previous US administration? And do you think there is a pattern of continuity or sharp deviations? More than that, learning from world leadership styles post World War II and the Cold War, in what ways did Trump isolationist policies benefit or harm Indonesia? Is there any long-term challenges or opportunities for us? Please.
Thank you, Ratri. Thank you to the Populi Center, to Kalangan Kofi, and to Avri for these really interesting questions. And I'll provide a bit of historical context and perhaps give some perspective on how the beyond the norms this Trump administration might be. So I'm going to quickly chart the sort of anti-colonial inspiration between Indonesia and the U.S. It's souring relationship in the early Cold War, and then close, if ethically fraught, new order friendship between Indonesia and the U.S., and then maybe a healthier pragmatism over the 20 years to give some sense of over time of where we might find ourselves. And the good news to start out is I think I have more hope than one might expect about U.S.-Indonesia prospects. Some of the bad news is that some of that optimism comes from a legacy that has been checkered, but we have still survived. That's a bit of hope. So thinking about the age of motion, sort of the student movements, the Pergerakan in the early 1900s. Right, the U.S. was a source of inspiration of democracy. That it had rebelled against colonial rule, and it served as an example to young Indonesian, including of course Bung Karno, of an ideal of the same ambitions of representation of democracy, equality, liberty, and that the U.S. was in an odd situation where it was, say, after the World War I, where it was pushing, encouraging decolonization, but didn't want to sour its relationship with British, French, other very established colonial force. U.S. had its own colonial empire, of course, in the Philippines. So it was an odd situation for and initially Indonesians thought the United States would be very helpful about agitating for independence, and eventually they were right. By 1949, the U.S. had aggressively lobbied the Dutch to stop fighting. The 4 years from 45 to 49. It's worth noting that is not exactly for idealistic reasons. It's because the early Cold War. It's because the Indonesians were doing a better job of fighting communism domestically than the Dutch presence there was encouraging that. So there was a relationship of hopeful era in this sort of, like, if we call it an age of Merdeka in early Indonesian U.S. relations. But of course, those relationships in the Cold War that sort of consumed the world, and especially the decolonized world, it was forced to make choices on that axis. That what I sort of we said, the years of living dangerously from the sort of 50s to 1965, right? That Cold War tensions grew, and Sukarno leaned increasingly towards a non-aligned foreign policy. I think the Bandung movement, 1955, is one of the greatest what ifs of the 20th century. What if that had been successful? The former colonized world had come together to resist the pushes of joining a new axis. Of course, that did not happen, but it was an important moment. But of course, it created tension between the U.S. and Indonesia, as it wanted client states in this new Cold War. Sukarno became increasingly critical of U.S. Influence and a breakdown, and leading to really subversion as foreign policy is famously written. Promesta Rebellion in '58. The U.S. is actively funding and arming separatism in the United States in the late '50s, and embarrassingly, it's a CIA airplane is shot down. Alan Pope that to bringing supplies to rebels. It can't be denied that its engagement. So if the independence 49 was a high point, we're now at a low point in the late '50s with that relationship, and that would increase, of course. Under Eisenhower, and the just counter communist influences around the world, and as Sukarno increasingly tried to straddle Nasakom, nationalism, religion, and communism, that became unacceptable for the U.S. and untenable for him domestically. And of course, the New Order, the 30th September movement would change radically sort of Indonesia's tenor, and also the relationship with the United States, as Suharto would reorient Indonesia towards the United States, towards the West, aggressively fostering strong economic ties, thanks to my alum and the Berkeley Mafia, and they would support Suharto's role as a stable anti-communist force in Southeast Asia, and that brought economic cooperation. It brought Indonesia into the modern economic world system, aggressively economic assistance, IMF, World Bank, but that had strings attached, of course, and it looked the other way on controversies and human rights issues in Indonesia, of course. Acutely the financial crisis in '97 brought the unleashed those frustrations, and then U.S.-backed reforms weren't enough to help keep Suharto in place, and of course the sort of amazing reformasi that I'm proud to say our alumni at NIU were important roles in that struggle. And so I think we're back to a high point in U.S. Indonesia. That's a moment of idealism that I think we can look back on, of the best impulses of democracy were working under in that era, and right? And then elections and a few presidencies later, Indonesia and the U.S. had a if if the pinging back and forth between being in the U.S. orbit, I think by SBA's tenure in 2004, we have a normalized pragmatic, which is I think Indonesia's not a client state of any country anymore, and where it deserves to be, and so a healthy, which means that you're not going to get all the benefits that you would get in a Suharto era where you were sort of a lapdog of empire, but you're also have your own foreign policy, you have your own agenda, and I think a healthy sets the pathway for where Indonesia would go on to grow. The 9/11 is another important. The war on terror would define a lot of and would strengthen and U.S. and Indonesia security alliances. I think those still continue, even though that struggle is now changed, and so that's another a high point of cooperation that U.S. and Indonesia enjoyed, and I think the 2000s are by many factors a high watermark for democracy in Indonesia, and in some cases in the U.S. as well. There are those sort of some of the glory days of the early Jokowi, late SBA years are fond memories for all of us of what the possibility, and so a balanced, mature diplomacy, I think, came out of what was a very tumultuous past between Indonesia, up to armed insurrection that the U.S. was funding, and came to a mature cooperation. And it's worth noting that the U.S.-Indonesia Comprehensive Partnership and emphasizing Indonesia's role in ASEAN became an important part of that. Is Indonesia's so the U.S. and Indonesia have a more peer relationship in beginning the 2000s, and I think that's important to note that has also made whatever waves might happen by a change of administration in the United States less dependent. You can imagine if in the Suharto era that would have meant a wild swing of the presidency. It would have meant a huge difference in Sukarno or Suharto's era. And then finally, I guess it's worth knowing that in the first Trump administration, the Chinese sort of have a phrase that sort of the mountains are high and the emperor is far away. That Indonesia was kind of left to itself in a good way. It wasn't a target of opportunity, and even agencies and U.S. agencies in Indonesia, USAID, I think maybe the State Department had a kind of could do what there wasn't a policy coming from the central government towards Southeast Asia, towards Indonesia, and that's not always a bad thing. Trade and Indo-Pacific security were emphasized, and of course more pragmatism under Jokowi, with the bilateral relationships. But so I mean, we're all leading up to the question of what my colleagues will speak to now is I think Indonesia's foreign policy has evolved from a very anti-Western stance, very pro-U.S. alignment under Suharto, followed by a pragmatic and balanced diplomacy. So the future, in closing, economic and security ties remain strong. But I think Indonesia's famous non-alignment and independent foreign policy should serve it well, and thank God it's a good moment to have that in an unsure administrative stance from the United States, not relying on any single global power. And there's some interesting potential of opportunity for Indonesia accidentally, where a trade war with China could benefit maybe short term, but Indonesia in that balance. And I think also Indonesians, you are. I feel very reassured speaking to my Indonesian friends because they've been through much more dramatic swings than we have in the United States. So the politics of hyperbole from Trump, we're going to take over Canada or whatever. Like I think they see it for what it is. You see it for what it is, which is bluster, but not really actually a thing that's ever intended. It's a negotiating strategy if one that's not particularly diplomatic, or tariffs, that things that defy the laws of economics, supply and demand, and these will naturally self-correct, right? These can't you just can't pretend that one thing, despite how much you might want it. So I guess in the it's hopeful for slightly tinged reason, which is we've been through a lot worse between Indonesia and the United States, and I think we can get through this, and we could even maybe succeed out of this. And I'll look for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. Uh, this is actually very optimistic kind of like comments from him, that we all really need this kind of like optimism, because seeing the ups and downs in the global political trend, the leaderships, and the current trend towards populism, right wings movement, and everything else. And Dr. Jones already show us there are ups and downs. Indonesia has been in very critical moment with the U.S. and also Indonesia relationship during Sukarno's era, and becoming really dependent to the U.S. during Suharto's era, and then less dependent. But now it seems that we need to be more non-aligned, right? Going for a non-alignment kind of like foreign policy approach that we generally have that kind of since the beginning. But again, the thing is, we've been there worse than this, so we can much worse than this. So together, I think the message from Dr. Jones, we can do it. So, okay, let's see. Give round of applause for Dr. Jones. All right, so moving to the next speaker. So, Dr. Durik, so you're psychologist, social psychologist. So we would like to know and understand, how can we make sense of someone like Trump winning a second presidential bid? Could you help us to make sense the psychological dimensions of voting behind Trump's populist appeal? And then how does Trump rhetoric and leadership style maybe influence political figures around the world, or perhaps here? I don't know. And is there any similarities between Trumpist movement in the US and populist movements that you can probably think of in other countries? But I would like to emphasize since you're psychologist, like the personality, how does this kind of like leadership emerge in this kind of like situations, and how people understand them in this kind of like polarized societies? Please.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to be on this exciting panel. Really, thank you, Ratri, and everyone. Right. So I would like to share a little bit of perspective. I'm not going to go as far back in time as Dr. Jones, but as I was reflecting on some of these questions that have been definitely on the minds of many in the United States as well as across the world, of how did Trump come to another term as president? I started to think about, I'm starting at sort of the coming out of the pandemic and reflecting on how that changed all of us in various ways. And I'd like to sort of point out a couple of things. So as you know, in 2020, you may recall that Trump was finishing his first term. There was an election. There were people who voted for Trump who felt very uncomfortable with the outcome of the election, although there was no evidence of actual fraud. And so there was difficulty that came out of that election. Then there were divisions even in the process of how to handle COVID, in terms of is this going to be a process where we are all going to be aware of everyone else's wellness and try to support each other, or are we going to exercise individual liberty, or try to exercise? So these are a few of the backdrops that I want to point out. And then as as time went on, and the economic consequences of COVID started to emerge, one of the things that has happened in the United States was an increase in inflation. And there was a lot of shifting. In terms of people's occupations, there were questions. There was a great deal of uncertainty. I say this because as a social psychologist, I study how people are influenced by the presence of other people, and how we think about other people and how we think about ourselves in reaction to others. So one of the things that emerged in this process was social comparisons. And social comparisons is where I might compare myself to Dr. Jones. And I could socially compare either and think about how much Dr. Jones is doing better than me, or I could think about how Dr. Jones is doing worse than me, right? So we can do upward or downward social comparisons. And as we came out of COVID, and I think that this was fostered by social media, where people can manicure or curate very carefully what information about themselves goes out online. I think there was a process of social comparison where people saw other people, they perceived that other people were doing a lot better. So if you think about the isolation of COVID and the perception that other people are doing a lot better, that leads to a considerable amount of discontent. So I think that people started to compare themselves to others, which is a very natural process, and it's not always bad. But it can be, in the sense that if it leads to sort of negative emotion, that's not necessarily going to be channeled in a positive direction. So one of the things that I think that led to was a moment where it was possible to, people search in those situations, they search for explanation. They may search for someone or an entity to blame, to explain, and to blame why they don't think they're doing as well as their neighbor. And I think that in that stage, in part, is where Donald Trump is very good at highlighting the discomfort of others, and coming out with a message that has a simplicity that feels like what people want to hear at that moment. And so I think that at some level, Trump's campaign helped people make sense of their discomfort coming out of COVID, which is one piece of this. It's not, I don't think that it's the only piece. So thinking a little bit more about currently, so the election happened, Trump was sworn in January, and he's been very busy signing a lot of executive orders, right? And it's been a very swift process. A lot is changing right now. I think part of what he was promising was to be decisive, and it'll be determined in the future the extent to which his swift actions is perceived as decisive, or as or potentially concerning, or too much too fast. There hasn't been, there's been a couple of executive actions or executive orders that were walked back after the consequences were realized already. So I think that may lead to the public perception that this may be too much too fast. And it will be interesting to see how that plays into popular opinion of Trump and his policies going forward. One of the things that I want to also point out is his administration is a fairly new group of people to politics. They're going to be encountering a lot of questions abroad, within the United States. And I think that my hope is that they listen and they think and they learn to become servants of the American people, which is exactly the positions that they're in. These are public servants, and to serve the American people. And ideally, I like to think of the United States as being a positive force in the world, and to continue that, to continue the efforts that have led to that belief in some ways. So in truth, that is one of my thoughts about the current situation. The other piece that I want to point to in terms of the current situation is there is a wide variety of opinions about Donald Trump in the United States. There's a whole dimension of perspectives on, based on whether an important distinction is the people who voted, whether they voted for him or whether they voted for someone else. It'll be interesting to see how the people who voted for Trump either stay the course and remain faithful, or they may begin to question or not the extent to which these actions have had implications.
So we have Philip Fermonte. He's the spokesperson for the Office of Communications in the Presidential Office. So we are very honored to have him here. So he soon will join our discussion. Dr. Amanda is now explaining us about the rise of Trumps and how does it affect the whole kind of like this polarization or division. Please continue.
Absolutely. Thank you and welcome. So as we think about people who voted for Trump, there's a process where if you behaved in a way that was in the direction of a given attitude, like being positive for Trump, there's a lot of reasons why, if you see something you don't like, you could contest and provide reasoning to yourself of why it was still a good idea to vote in one direction or the other. And so there are cognitive processes where if we see a discrepancy in our behavior and an outcome that we may or may not like, there's actually cognitive reasons and motivational reasons why we might work to justify our initial behavior. And so I think that it will be very interesting to see the evolution of public opinion across time, as we observe the unfolding of this administration. Moving forward, I've been thinking a little bit. Is as voters think about the impact of various policies and a change in the approach the United States is seeming to take at the present time, it's worth remembering that although there's a lot of discussion about division in the United States in terms of political beliefs, and there are what I've heard is referred to as the wings, the sort of the far left or the far right, and the perspectives that are represented there. It's also very important to remember that the majority of voters in the United States are moderate, and they care about issues in thoughtful ways. They appreciate and see the complexity of some of some of the policies that may be enacted. So there are two phenomena that I would like to highlight, and it touches on some of your questions that you put to me, Ratri. I wanted to speak about two phenomena that are very important to our social relations. And in both cases, each of them is fairly slow to evolve and to develop. And it's also relatively easy to dismantle. And so these are two things that are areas of concern for me. And one of them One of them is the norms that are being broken. So norms from a social psychological perspective are the unwritten rules of what's acceptable behavior. And thinking about the norms of respectful political discourse, the norms of respectful exchange across countries, thinking about the example that Trump puts forth in some context that's very different from the norms, and some of the norms that have there are norms in the United States within the legislature, within sort of what people do, that Trump has really quite been has deviated from those norms. And in general, those norms are very helpful. The norms that I'm talking about are norms that sort of keep people together and keep discourse civil and appropriate. And although there are times when it's important to speak up, there are times when it is appropriate to disagree, to do so in a way that respects other people's humanity. So I think that I worry about the reduction of certain norms that facilitate people bringing people together, working together, and staying together. The other phenomenon that I want to point out is the issue of trust. Trust is something that develops slowly. Trust is the extent to which another individual or entity has goodwill and will follow through in their goodwill toward the other. And in this case, trust is something that's built over a long period of time. And we could be talking about trust between people, or we could be talking about trust between nations. But I think that I want to think about how do we maintain the trust that exists, so that as we have political challenges in the future, we are also able to hold together as and cooperate across nations and within the United States as well. So I will finish up by saying I do think that one of the important things is to continue to reach across borders at the individual level. And at non-political organizations are really important for maintaining relationships when things are rocky through political discourse and political policy. But what's really very important is that we do seek ways to cooperate. We do seek solutions that are mutually beneficial, and that we ultimately develop a fabric of trust and support norms of cooperation through this time. So that's all.
That's excellent, Dr. Durik. Give round of applause for Dr. Durik. So Dr. Durik has already shared her thought, and then it's just kind of like, it's amazing that you mentions about bring people together in the middle because they are the majority, but maybe they are unheard, unseen, or afraid to speak. So bringing the COVID-19 as a backdrop, or how this leadership merge, we can learn how people in America starting to like divide. But again, there is no use of like to be in the extreme, right? If you cannot have these signs of trust to your government, trust to each other, and trust your own people, right? Don't break norms. Just, being a decent people. Right? Okay, so we move to the next speaker right now. To need time to, okay, so it's going to, okay. So, Afri, okay. Shall we go to Dr. Afri Madonna? And I would like you to continue what Dr. Durik has already tell us about from her psychological analysis. And you are a political scientist, and you're an expert in foreign policy. Could you enlighten us by providing context of the current extremely polarized US political dynamics, of course, from your political science perspective, and also you as Indonesian seeing that kind of like situation to help us understand the global populist trend? And then what does Trump's winning two non-consecutive elections impact democracy in both countries, the US and Indonesia? And I would like you to highlight long-term challenges and opportunities for Indonesia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ratri, for this opportunity. And thank you, Pak Philip, Pak Jones, and Ibu Durik for coming here to give a talk to our audience. This is really nice, topics currently debated, around the world, that the rise of Trump, the return of Trump, to power, bring, even more, extreme challenges compared to his previous rise in 2015, 2016. But I want to underline several points. First, for better or worse, this is how democracy works, right? I don't know, but at least, compared to other semi-authoritarian countries in the world, we do not heard, some news about, election manipulation or something like that in the U.S., right? So this is purely how people thought about leadership, and then how they punish leaders if they are not satisfied with the leaders. I remember, in literature, there is what we call democratic efficiency theory, right? That democracy is, the most efficient one of, turning over power. I mean, if you think about the market, where if you don't like these goods, then you do not need to buy it and then buy another goods, right? And then this is how democracy works. If you don't like leadership, if you don't like the policies offered by the previous leadership, you cannot, you have a choice of not electing them, and then choose another one, right? And then what I want to say is that yes, the leadership failure, the policy failures in the previous administrations contributes as well to the rise of Trump. So this is the political aspects that we need to recognize. Some people, even like Jeffrey Saul, even say that previous leadership, incompetent and so on and so on. Then because of this, then Trump, can sell whatever rhetoric he want to say, right, to the public, and the public, and in a very simple language, the public vote his rhetorics, right, and elected him to be the president. So from the political context, we need to understand that the failure of democratic parties in facilitating the leadership that can be sold, that can be offered to the public, right? And then some problems, of handling foreign policies in overseas, for example, right? Which is regarded as very costly to the American, and so on and so on. This is the rhetorics or the issues that Trump brought to the public, and the public, the sentiment is really resonates to the public minds. And then they accept this as something that we need to return to the greatness of the American, right? The second things that I would like to address is that the depolarization. Yes, Dr. Ratri mentions about the depolarization, political polarization. Yes, political polarization in the U.S., is increasingly, is increasingly more extreme, right? Even the study of political polarization begins in the U.S., right? Because they invented how to measure this polarization. Previously, this is kind of policy polarization, but then bit by bit, this kind of policy polarization, policy differences, policy attitude differences, um, permeates to many dimensions, right? To many dimensions, to the feelings, right? Even to the taste, right? You can predict, someone's whether someone is Republican or Democratic from how they consume something, even, right? There are studies about the right. If you scan their brain, you can predict, oh, this is Republican and this is right, this is Democratic. I ever read an article about it. Political scientists collaborated with medical scholars, trying to scan, using MRI, the brain, the texture of the brain of Republican versus, Democrats. And then they see differences, So this shows how polarized Americans are. They are not only different in policy position, but in many things, right? In culture, in identity, right? And so on and so on. And this polarization, is fanned out by leaders, by politicians, of course. So politicians who can sell a more extreme positions, are more likely to be elected. And in many studies, we know that, right? At least, since 1980s, right? We know with the rise of Carter, the rise of Ronald Reagan, right? Even in the previous era, and the rise of in Republican Newt Gingrich, right, as the now politicians in the Congress. And then when he became leadership in Republicans, he punished, politicians who did not take, position in line with his policies, right? He allocated, chairman of some chambers to those who are polarized. So and then these dynamics of polarization, become increasing over time, and resonate to the public as well. So from this perspective, I think it is not surprising we see such person as Donald Trump, actually. So it is actually, anticipated, right? Tea Party, the rise of Tea Party, right? Also, that the problem. So, and then it is exacerbated by the economic problem as well, right? The loss of the jobs in Rust Belt. So I think, again, it is not surprising, right? Democratic loss, support in such state like Wisconsin, Michigan, right? Because of course, in Rust Belt, there are a lot of job losses, because of technological advancement and so on and so on. And Trump capitalized this, right? Capitalize this, and then sell this rhetoric, and then finally, he was elected. Foreign policy failure, as well as I mentioned before, inability of democratic leadership solve some problem overseas. Spending more money overseas, while regarded as ignoring domestic problems. So also something, that Trump, can buy. Now, the second things that I would like to address as well is that Trump seems to be in paradoxical position as well in this. On the one hand, he boasts about the greatness of the Americans, right? we are the only superpower. But on the other hand, he doesn't want that we take responsibility to the world, right? And want to pull the U.S. back. So this is problematic because his action, implies that the U.S. is not a superpower anymore. Because superpower status indicates that you are capable of taking responsibility to provide global public goods, right, in the world. But if you do not do that, then it means that you want to give up as a superpower, because it means that there are nobodies that can manage this global public goods. And if this happens, then the problem will be getting worse and worse, because insecurities can increase everywhere. And so this means that public support for democratic movement everywhere, at least will decline, right? Will if it is not cut, at least it will decline. So come back to your questions, Boratri. Does this will encourage global populist movement? And of course, if you do not have money to educate voters, in democratic system and so on and so on, then a politician will educate the voter, right? Politicians with a lot of money, have a chance to educate voter for their own interests, right? So it means that yes, populist movement might increase everywhere. Uh, you know, in addition, so some problem with immigration and so on and so on, also encourage, populist rhetoric to be more interesting to the people. So I think that's the general overview that I think hopefully answering some of your questions, and then we will continue with Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Afri Madona. Again for Afri Madona. So this is becoming interesting, and it is really a nice segue for the next speaker, which is Dr. Fermonte. But I would like to touch up a little bit about what Afri just mentions to us, because it seems that if you really still want to support democracy or still believe a democracy still prevail, for better or worse, this is what's coming out from the democratic system. But a democratic system means that the rotations or circulations of the elites can be done in elections. If you don't like the leader, don't choose or don't elect the leader and find some other people. However, what happened in the US, telling us a different story. The rise of populist movement, the rise of Donald Trump with his kind of like very particular style of leadership. We are kind of like ambiguous also to respond to it. At one point, Afri has eloquently shared to us that he's in the positions to make America great again. However, he really doesn't want to help anyone at all. Cut the US aid, cut foreign aid funding, cut university spending, and everything else that shock all of us. Even people in Indonesia is also shocked. So regarding to those kind of like policy, I mean, we have this policy guy here, and he is coming from the Office of Communication. He's the spokesperson for international affairs. So we are again happy to have you here. Dr. Philip Formonte, I have questions for you. So you have 12 minutes, but if you would like to extend, we would be happy to have your view. How does Trump rising to power for a second time impact Indonesia? So that's easy question. Second one, what should Indonesia anticipate from future US administrations? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ratri, and thank you for the invite, Pa Afri. It's good to see you again, Dr. Jones and Dr. Amanda. I cannot say no because in responding to your invitation, because Dr. Jones is in my dissertation committee, so I have no option, and then I have to come. But somehow, I think the topic is a timely and very important one for us. I have a few comments, and probably I'm not directly answering your question, but I hope I can touch from some explanations. Number one, election is domestic political matters. So I will not be commenting on the why Donald Trump was elected U.S. president and so on, because that's completely, I think, the domestic political affairs of the United States and the Americans. But what we are in need of discussion is what does it mean for Indonesia, and how then Indonesia and some other countries would respond to a possible policy that would be taken by Trump administration second time around. The general response was number one, Indonesia. I'm invited as the spokesperson, not as a scholar. So the first response would always be that Indonesia will always develop a good relationship with any country. The U.S. is, of course, special because U.S. is a superpower, and then the U.S., as I believe Dr. Jones have been explaining in his presentation, has been a long time good friend of Indonesia, has been helping Indonesia's development for a long time. And then I think we as well learn from the US for years in terms of development, institutionalizations, and there are a lot of political scientists trained in the US and economists as well. So the US has been a good friend of Indonesia, like some other countries and many other countries. But this is now my personal view. The US, I don't believe the US is in decline. I think, of course, the US remains the most powerful country in the world in terms of the military. The US is the strongest country in the world. What happened is, I believe the other countries are catching up. So US remain the strongest nation on earth, but other countries are catching up. And I think then we are hoping that policymakers in the US and in many Western world understand this, that countries like like Indonesia and many other developing countries, we are catching up. We have our momentum. Indonesia is on the way, according to many international institutions, on the way to become the fifth largest economy not long from now. And then, of course, that would require, number one, good partnership with everybody. Number two, we need peace, stability, and international cooperation. So that's why with the US, we should, in my view, maintain a very good relationship wherever we can. And it is understandable, but for any leader, they would have their own preference. And that's where diplomacy play a very important role. But that should be based on mutual understanding, right? From the side of the US and of course from the side of Indonesia. And in this arena, we've been doing a lot of, we have a lot of experience as far as our relationship is concerned. And of course, there was a time when the relations is in the highest momentum, but there are low level as well in our relationship. But that's I think we passed that, and then there are a lot of references that we can have. Number two, Indonesia would maintain good relationship and will always develop relationship with country with whom our interests intersect. Now, if I may, our interests are fourfold, of course. And then, like President Trump would want to advance the U.S. interest, then Indonesia has our interest as well. Number one, our particular interest with the new administration of President Prabowo Subianto, of course, we want to continue to grow economically, right? Of course, we want to bring prosperity. We are already member of G20, but of course, we have agreed on this, a vision of being a developed country by 2045. Malaysia put a more a shortened time. I think they want to be a developed country by what 2030 or 2040. But all these countries, as I was saying earlier, we are catching up. So second interest would be prosperity, and then third interest protecting our sovereignty. Now, all of which require peace, stability, and both at national and regional level. Now, at the regional and international level, we cannot escape from the fact that the US and China are competing. Now, what we need to do, and I think what Indonesia has been doing, is that we try very hard not to be defined by the nature of relationship between the US and China, because as they are competing, our interests seem to be defined by the nature of this competition. And I think that is not what we want to be in, right? We want to have our own strategic autonomy, regardless of this U.S.-China competition, and that is the hardest part, actually. Right? President SBY started to navigate. President Jokowi for 10 years have been, in my view, quite successfully navigating this difficult situation of the competition, strategic competition between US and China. And now President Prabowo has done the same thing. Our DNA, Indonesia's DNA has always been that we have our perimeter, so to speak, that is ASEAN, Southeast Asian region, and we have been trying to protect the region of our own, not as well to be defined by U.S.-China relations. So ASEAN would be the center, because that way we can make sure that neither U.S. nor China can interfere in the matters in Southeast Asia. And we've been sending message to not only to the U.S. but all countries that would want to partner with China. But there are certain things that you need to sign. For example, we want all regional partners of ASEAN or dialogue partners of ASEAN to agree on that this is a region free of nuclear weapons, and they have to sign the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation and so on. So we try very hard to make this region peaceful, although there were a period where I think I slightly show Dr. Jones' slide presentation. There were certain times that ASEAN or Indonesia in particular have been seen more inclined to the West, but that's, I think, out of economic interest. Now, number 4 that I'd like to share here is that, given what happened with in the U.S., like what Dr. Afri Madonna has been saying, this is democracy, results of democracy, and so on. But I think in our era this time, what is important is not only the question of democracy, but the question of governance. Look at the experience of COVID-19. COVID-19 was a strange period for us. So there were a lot of thinkings, right? Because we are staying in our house, our home thinking. And then at that time, we were expecting US would do great in tackling the problem of COVID-19. US was the strongest nation, rich, and so on. But we've seen in the US as well, one of the largest, a number of victims of COVID-19 is basically in the US. I remember New York Times, at one day, put all these 100,000 people who already died, in the US. And that was a few months within this COVID-19 period. So I was thinking at that time, if the US, a democratic country, very rich, you have everything you need to tackle the pandemic, we have all the experts and so on, yet they were not very successful in tackling the problem of COVID-19. Same time, our neighbor Singapore, Dr. Afri Madonna would not categorically put Singapore in a in a democratic group, for example. But I think now this is, Singapore is a great nation. I'm not saying anything about Singapore, but this is my learning curve. Yeah. uh, Singapore has been successfully tackling the problem of COVID-19 simply because they have a very good governance. So what we are aiming at, in my view, is whether or not developing nations institutionalizing governance so that they can achieve, in the context of Indonesia, these three interests that I've been putting on, achieving prosperity, growth, and security, because that's the area that many of the worst Western institutions have been helping us to build, right? World Bank, IMF, OECD. Indonesia would be a member of OECD with this requirement that would make countries member of OECD would be institutional enough to catch up with the cooperation with OECD countries. So what I'm basically saying is that we are in the time where institution and governance are very important, and Indonesia would keep battering in this arena of institutionalization. So if we think US has been in democracy for more than 250 years, we are starting to be a democratic country in 1998. So of course there will be some lessons to learn, and then we as a nation would improve ourselves throughout time. Number four, I think what the president has been doing in the past few months, only 3 months in power, in the presidential position. If you look at the travel that the president has been going to various countries and various meetings, the theme has always been development. The president went to the G20 meetings. The president went to the APEC meeting in Peru and Brazil, and then went to Washington D.C. and then to developing aid, D8 in Cairo and so on. But the theme that have been discussed by the presidents throughout this meeting have always been about development, meaning we really want to get our momentum going, at least in this from 2024 to 2029. So what they've been doing is trying to forge the mutual interest of developing countries of this development. And I think this is very intriguing as well, because that year, 2024, the APEC meeting was hosted by developing country, Peru, and then G20 also by Brazil. And it has become a platform where developing countries put forward their interests to the developed countries of G7 who are in G20 platform, which is, I think, that's a very good opportunity for countries like Indonesia to not to be defined by US, China, strategic competition, and also not be defined by the conflicts that have been occurring in Ukraine, in Gaza, and so on, as if that kind of conflicts would distract from our very goal that we want to achieve, that is development. So that in itself, I think, provide the foundation of how we should navigate this uncertain period, if you will, especially because of the ongoing strategic competition between US and China. Lastly, as an introduction, whether we can, I think later we can discuss this. I wrote this in my piece for Compass Daily 2 months ago, if I'm not mistaken. And this is, I don't mean any negative word, because sometimes when you're translating English into Bahasa Indonesia, it sounds like it's derogatory words. Like I was writing, in my view, the US is the devil we know, because we've been cooperating and have been in cooperation with the US. China is the devil we don't know. Right? So in dealing with two devils, we have to rely on our own. Like you were saying, USAID has been cut off and so on. I think that should give more impetus for us to really self-rely on many aspects. Because in the end, leaders like Trump or like Xi Jinping or like whoever leaders that who are now ruling, their basic interest is to protect their own citizen and to bring prosperity to the nation first. So looking at those from that kind of perspective, it is just right for Indonesia as well to start thinking new avenues to navigate this, and then to expand and to maintain our strategic space by finding new platforms. That's why we joined BRICS. And at the same time, we remain committed to be joining OECD and looking at different avenues so that we can continue protecting our interests, regardless of whoever the president of the United States is, or whoever president of China. So we have to be maintaining our strategic space by continuing this. Secondly, now we are in the era of Indo-Pacific. In my view, we've been investing our energy, intellectual energy, economy, politics, and so on through the Pacific part. Because China is there, Japan, Taiwan, United States, and so on, because that's the center of economic growth right now. But we, Indonesia, neglect the Indo part. We rarely look at this other side of our backyard, if you will. And there are great nations as well in the Indo part. You have India growing rapidly. And then only, I think, in their Indo-Pacific document, only Japan mentions about extending their interest to Africa. And if China is under in a conflictual situation with the US, it's just natural for us to start thinking about the Indo part, forging new avenue and new possibilities with the African or the Indo sides of this Indo-Pacific. So that requires, of course, understanding, investment intellectually, and then maybe change the mindset a little bit. I'm not saying the US is not important, not at all, but given what happened, because the US will do what they need to do, right? Indonesia, and then, of course, we have to do what we need to do as well. So in order for us to remain stable and to remain strategically autonomous. I think that's my introduction to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vermonte. Give round of applause. So Dr. Vermonte has given us like a perspective that to me is new perspective about seeing the U.S. and Indonesia's relationship because he doesn't believe that U.S. is in decline. So what he believes that U.S. still the strongest military and powerful nation in the world, and other countries. So this is interesting. Other countries are catching up, including Indonesia. And what he take from that is Indonesia shouldn't be like in between, trapped in between the contestations between the U.S. and also China, the two giants. We should define what ourselves can do, especially forging mutual understanding with other part of the world, especially in Indo, part, India, and other countries perhaps. So to me, it seems that diplomacy plays very important role to share mutual interests with the U.S., especially during this Prabowo administration, to enhance our economy, prosperity, and protecting our sovereignty. So with that said, we will move to our new segment, the second sessions. And again, for those who are in the virtual platform, you can use Zoom or you can watch our YouTube channel. And we also have Instagram. Please feel free to access those informations from those platforms. And this second session, we will have discussions taking from the audience. How we conduct this session. So any of you would like to have a questions, please convey it in a very brief questions. Mention your name, mention your affiliations if there's one, and also the questions addressed to which speaker. Shall we begin? All right. Any question from the audience here? Not yet? Okay, so taking from our discussions, I would like to perhaps starting from Dr. Durik first, because to me, studying about the personality of the leaders is very interesting, especially that personality that can transform the policy into what we are now seeing, such as like Department of Dodge. What does it stand for? It's a Government Efficiencies Office. So what kind of like mindset that perhaps influence Trump's understandings about this kind of like efficiency? Like what kind of like personality that he transformed himself to be, in your opinion? Thank you. So I should say that partially not. Sorry about that. So thank you. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. So as we think about personality as a characteristic way of behaving that's consistent across situations and stable across time, in my area of expertise, I study more or I don't study this, but it's in my area. It's in my area more generally. It's not my specific area of study. Is thinking about the very typical personality traits that people might express, and so these are personality traits such as extroversion
or neuroticism, conscientiousness, agreeableness, those kinds of traits is one of the ways we think about this. In terms of, so I guess there are also personality characteristics that are very garden variety, exist in the population at just sort of normal variations. I cannot speak to directly about Trump's personality in the sense that I have not studied him. And I can't speak to whether or not it is sort of a garden variety, normal variation of personality versus any abnormal personality trait. What I can share is what I've seen, as long as I imagine other people have observed, is that President Trump has a certain, I think that he has a way with words. I think that he often can explain things in ways that he's able to he knows what people want to hear. I don't know of a personality trait that this was really captured. But what's interesting to me is that he's very effective in communicating with others in a way that some people are often, it appears from my distal perspective, it seems that often people get on board with his ideas. Not everyone, but he's persuasive in a certain way. And I don't know, at some level that requires his ability to be aware of what other people seek or want to hear. On the other hand, I've seen him behave in ways that seems very unaware of other people and much more aware of himself. And so in that sense, it's a bit of a conundrum to be, because it's at some level he behaves in ways that shows that he at some level picks up on what other people are seeking to hear. And on the other hand, I'm not sure that his behaviors are often, it appears to me, fairly guided by his own perspective and not necessarily listening to the perspective of others. So that's probably what I can share with you about my thoughts about that.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Durik. Is there any response from the audience that would like to ask? I mean, seeing this global trend towards some kind of like populist leader, and then we see Trump, and also we see other peoples across the globe starting to also and already use this kind of rhetoric. So I would like to move to Dr. Jones. So do you think that the Trump style of leadership, is it unique, or from your historical perspective, this is not unique at all? Because there are some, perhaps, that the world has already taught us. This increasing kind of a trend is kind of like repeating. And perhaps today there will be more of the leaders, or perhaps to become leaders in the future, who'd like to imitate his stance. Please.
I mean, I think it's easy to jump to sort of worst case scenario, but I think more than this predates the 20th century. The grievances, right, that you tap into, like, I mean, what a lot of what we're seeing in the United States, and this goes to his sort of simple style of Trump's simple style, persuasive, is like undergirding all of this. Afri brought this up, is that that there is people are worse off if you talk to Indonesians, all of them almost are better off than their grandparents, are better off than their parents, probably. I don't know what the polling says, but I'm willing to guess like a huge percentage. If you talk to Americans, real or perceived, they definitely feel worse off than their parents' kids do. Their views of starting a family, of owning a home, of paying for college, of right. It is, and so you can really feel right. There's grievance among people that there are, and so what's wrong, and liberals tend to have complicated well, it's lots of there's this and there's that, let's study it out, analyze it, and he provides a very it's immigrants, right? Or it's like it's very very simple solutions for why you are worse off than, so this politics of grievance, and so it taps into the candidate of change. They really don't care, or they're not carefully thinking about what changes that are actually, and you see this playing out as some of those executive orders are really hitting the bottom line of some of the voters, like this USAID cut. Guess what? Those farmers who voted for him have, soybean contracts with providers all around the world. It's going to, absolutely decimate. Or if you take away migrant workers who work on it, Wisconsin dairy farms, like who's going to do that work? They will shutter, right? And so, but you all that as a voter, or if you feel viscerally that you want a change and you're willing to sort of close your eyes and say, it's a failure of leadership of current administrations to provide answers to that. And I think again, in Indonesia's election in February a year ago was about continuity. A big part of it was about Indonesians liked the way they were headed. They felt like their prosperity, their outlook was headed in a particular direction. And in many ways, I think Prabowo was the candidate who promised to provide more of that, more than any of the other candidates potentially. And so I think a lot of it is based in, and so you can, and candidates can tap into this grievance, resorting to sort of fascist or right-wing rhetoric is dangerous, is harmful, right? That has borne out sort of a masculine, aggressive, right? That has intended and unintended consequences. So I think, right, it's particularly unnerving just because it's had historical precedents that have not gone well, and I think it remains to be seen, however, and I want to believe in the better angels of our nature, but there's still, but what a great time for Indonesia to have a strong autonomous foreign policy, to be thinking, to be non-aligned, right? To not be dependent on only China or only the U.S. or right. It's really, it is an opportunity for, I think for Indonesians to think like, let's really do outline what is best for Indonesia, and let's seek that out in the same way that the U.S. would, or China would.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones, for your insight. Is there anyone, again? I will again and again calling from the audience. Yes.
My name is Reski. Everybody call me Kiki. Eric, nice meeting you again, and everyone. Well, Trump for me is quite complex here when I saw most of the policy, and I'd like to. I'm kind of intrigued with Professor Monte said that actually U.S. is the devil as we know. Now I think the U.S. becoming the devil we don't know. Well, so most of the policy, like for instance, I might zoom in into one of the policy. I think it's quite, for me, it's quite interesting that Trump will try to minimize the anti-corruption things, the bribery. For instance, he said that the U.S. company, as long as it brings the national interest, you can do the bribery. While at the same time, we, Indonesia now, everybody is like having like big concern about corruption, and the president, Pak Prabowo, said that the problem is we have a lot of corruption in my country. Well, at the other way around, now that Trump is coming with a statement that actually, no, as long as you bring national interests, well, we're okay with it. And I think this is quite the heart of the relationship between countries here, because I know I was like, now I just finished my term as the Anti-Corruption Commission Selection Committee. and it's also my concern. And the things is, the the U.S. is quite the forefront of the anti-corruption like initiative. Like for instance, and famously that the U.S. we have the FCPA, Foreign Anti-Corruption Act practices. I mean, that's one of the safeguarding of the most of the business. But now because of this, it may change like the whole business landscape between the US and everyone else throughout the globe. So it means, I mean, like this is something now I don't see like the clarity of actually where is the US going now at the moment. And I think it is quite important for us to understand as well where is the direction of the US. It may brings the impact to us. And because actually most of the what I say the relationship, and I think this is one of the important elements of the relationship of the country is trade. I think the last bastion of the relationship between the country is the trade itself. But with this new landscape, I don't know where we're going. So I think now I can say that the US is the terra devilish incognito. I don't know anymore. I don't know this devil anymore. So I would like to have your comment on this, especially Professor Monte, of what we should expect from this. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you, Pak. I'm sorry, Pak Saidi. Pak Saidi, thank you so much. And then please, Dr. Vermonte, to take the question.
That's a very interesting take about the US. But I think when President Trump was saying such thing with regard to the US companies, in my view, US companies have been practicing principled businesses, and I think they will continue doing, good practices in business. So, in my view, they would not be affected by the President Trump's statement, because the way I see it, the U.S. You have the government and you have the society, the people, great Americans, and then companies, private companies that have been operating in this region with certain principles and standards and so on. So, in my view, that kind of statement would not really affect the way businesses are conducted by U.S. companies overseas. Now, the other side of the coin is that even strengthen my conviction that in the end, all countries are thinking about their own interest. That statement, we agree or not, right? That you can do whatever you want as long as you bring our national interest. That's, I think, that points to the exact ideas that I have in mind, that Indonesia now is quote unquote big enough to be always keep our national interest first and try very hard to persuade other countries if 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 there are times where our interests collides with countries like the US. But I think given our understanding now that President Trump would think about the US first, Xi Jinping, the same thing, will think about China first. Now, I think we have to, what should I say here? Not Indonesia first, but uh, uh, think about how think about how we can best achieve our interest. If that requires what is it? Sometimes sacrifice, little sacrifice, not big ones, when it comes to international relations. then I think we have to find ways to mitigate the risk. There are some, for example, discussions and suggestions. If the tariffs that will probably be imposed by Trump to countries that have trade deficit. And it turns out, if you look at the experience of other countries who've been the victim of this tariff imposed by President Trump in the first Trump administration, these countries did something very clever. They tried to achieve agreement with states, state level. Some countries, if I'm not mistaken, Canada, UK, and what is maybe Mexico, I forgot which countries, but they do have this kind of strategy that they forge a mutual agreement with the state level, right? Maybe California and others, to have some kind of a trade facilitation that then will fed off the tariff imposed. So in the end, it remains the same. That's basically what I'm trying to say. So there are ways where we can learn from other countries and how they deal with this tariff. And then the same thing with the issue of corruption, regardless of what President Trump is saying about corruption. But I think Indonesia and the president remain committed that it is our problem. Because President Trump said so doesn't mean that we will follow suit, right? So we need to be very committed, as the president said, and then I think that's the response should come from our friends from the U.S. about that statement of President Trump, not from us, I think. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Formente. Shall we hear from other panelists? Do you have anything to respond, maybe?
I mean, to Prof. Philip's point, I think that he's right that you know that we were at an education fair recruiting Indonesian students coming to NIU, by the way, and you know, but you know, there are the U.S. is very diverse, not as diverse as Indonesia, but it's very big, very broad in the federal system. So right, the places like California and Illinois, for example, or California is the 5th largest economy in the world if it were a country by itself, right? So you have, and they have a very different political alignment than the rest of the country that voted for Trump, and so and Illinois similarly, especially Chicago. So I think there are partnerships, and in some ways the they will be more keen to seek, you know, they can't rely on the federal government to sort of operate in their interests, perceived interests. So I think in some ways states, and quite significant ones, will be more keen to have their own trade delegations, to forge their own relationships, MOUs. And so yeah, we could see, and you know, in some ways that is they're having that grassroots, very big, broad sweep of these connections could really, again, it's not all your eggs are not in one basket, and that's not the worst position. And there's an advantage of a country like Indonesia that's not in the, you know, the top 2 global superpowers. You don't have to have that bullseye on you. You can sort of seek out your interest a little more under the radar. You don't feel like you have to be the world's police. You don't have, right, all these other things that other countries do. It's an opportunity to develop its own sort of interest.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Anything from Pak Afri, maybe?
Yeah, I thank you, Ratri. I'm gonna add just a little bit more. I mean, yes, that's the cool things of being a federal government, right? Maybe the American founding fathers anticipated that the U.S., you know, is gonna have this kind of leaders in the future, and then you have to anticipate so that even though there is a problem to the government, it will not permeate to the lower levels of governance. So you still or be able to do the good things for your own people, right? So I think that's a good thing. So one thing that I want to add as well is that yes, the U.S. is actually I would say that is normalized. Trump is kind of normalizing, the U.S. status in the world power. Actually, in the sense that they will try to normalize, to pull the U.S. back to the normal state, because previously the U.S. is like an outlier in the international system, right? Superpower. You are, the only superpower country. But because of the burden that you bear, right? Then at the end of the day, you need to normalize yourself. And then I remember Robert Gilpin, in War and Cheng, in war politics, right? It is very costly, to maintain hegemony, right? At the end of the day, being a hegemon, it means that you kind of sow the seeds of your own fall. So if you are not carefully able, to manage this, then you gonna be decline. And yes, even though the decline is not because if we think in terms of the liberal policy, absolute advantage, everything is going up, everything, size up, and then yes, the US is not decline, but as Populi says that, and everybody catch up, right? Everybody catch up. But what people, always warn to the U.S. Before is that please stay aware that, don't be kind of like imperial of a stretch, right? Yeah, because, if you are not carefully, quite careful in managing your hegemonic status, then you're going to be inclined to do imperial stretch, and then it will be really, really costly to you. So that's why realist realist is the one who who frequently warn American leaders not to to be tempted to do this, right? I don't know, in IR literature, right? We believe that liberal policy is always tend to be peaceful, while the realist theories tend to be more warlike, something like that. But in fact, because most realist scholars know better war compared to liberals, then that's why they warn the U.S. governments that you need to stay aware. You need to restrain yourself. Don't be, don't push others, to be like you. But but many liberal presidents, violate this, and then at the end of the day, Trump want to normalize these situations, and then I think Trump's wants to pull back and the U.S. positions, so that at the end of the day, hopefully, we're gonna get the new equilibrium in power politics. I think, yeah.
Thank you so much. Dr. Durik would like to comment, or
No, I think I'm good on this one.
thank you. And other questions? Okay, sure.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Everybody can hear me? Very good. My name is David Castro, and the only association and reason I'm here is because I'm the spouse of Amanda Durik. But the conversation is going very well, and I just have a question that goes mostly for the political scientists in the room. So let me see if I can get to it very quickly here. We heard a few minutes ago that there's a populist streak going on in the world. The election of Donald Trump is just the latest event in the world that happened with this populist streak. It's going on in Europe. Not every European country is suffering from this problem, but let me not even call it a problem, but the phenomenon. But it's going on. It's something that is going on in the world. I tend to believe that there is no voice, no leadership on the other side. I don't know who is the progressive voice right now that is countering the populist streak that is going on in the world. Coming to Indonesia, this is my first time in Indonesia. I like it very much. In the Caribbean, I was born and grew up in the Caribbean. This is exactly the way you feel about the heat and the humidity. That's the way I feel all the time when I was little. So I come, now I live in the US. So coming to Indonesia, I tried to do a little bit of homework about the history of Indonesia and the economy in Indonesia. And one of the things that I learned is that it's a relatively young democracy. And the second thing that I learned, to my surprise, is that it's a very strong economy. You're top 20 GDP. Is that right? So the question that comes to my mind as I listen to the conversation is Indonesia ready to fill the gap? Not necessarily to be the progressive voice, but to be a voice, a third voice. I'm wondering, I hear what you're saying, and I really like what I'm hearing, leading in Southeast Asia, looking a little bit beyond India. I'm wondering, is Indonesia ready to be a global voice, to be a global counter to what is going on right now? I leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dave. I think this is a question that probably better answer from Dr. Prapatan, please.
Thank you. Sometimes Indonesians, we are too harsh on ourselves. Right? We could not accept the fact that we are G20. We are potentially a good nation with prosperity, but we criticize ourselves too much. So we shoot ourselves on the foot. But regardless, I think that's the point, the exact point that I'd like to highlight, actually, that we can be, as I said, when the president went to Peru and went to Brazil, the agenda that he and other developing nations at that meetings put forward was development. So that's the agenda of the so-called Global South, that voicing the concern that we see all these conflicts around the globe, and then you have China-US relations, but we have to remind everybody that our main concern is how we can continue to grow through development. And that's the message have been, I think, heard clearly among the other developed countries in the platform. So having said that, of course, Indonesia does not have the ambition to be a global power. We are middle power at best. But there are platforms that we can, hopefully we can effectively use. G20 is one, because there are, Brazil is in there, India is in there. So together you can be a voice for the more, I'm not using the term progressive, but developing country oriented voice when it comes to global politics. And secondly, it might as well be achieved through minilaterals, like BRICS, for example, and development aid, as I mentioned earlier, and even ASEAN, Southeast Asian nation. So regional grouping might be as well the vehicle for these developing countries to maintain their shared interests and pursue their interests, at least within their region. And of course, it's been great that the developed countries help and then at the same time benefit from these regional groupings. ASEAN is just one. You have other regional groupings in other part of the world that bring benefit for both the member as well as the the partners of that regional organization. So, if I may reiterate, the developing countries is really, we are feeling that we have this momentum. And of course, we don't want this momentum to be ruined by development in the US or conflicts between US and China. But of course, we know our place, right? We have to navigate, and then we have to remind developed countries that we do have our own interest. So sometimes we cannot really be, I think both US and China would want developing countries to choose which side are we on. And that's not the way we want to go, right? Because choosing either one would, of course, be detrimental to many of our goals. So that's, I think, my response to the question. And then, I'm glad that you see Indonesia is a good place. But sometimes we are very, what is it, harsh to ourselves. And we fail sometimes to see from the helicopter view about where we are. But that's, thank you for the reminder.
If I could add, and your question, I think there's some like many ways that Indonesia sort of global leadership. They have such a unique advantage. I had the good fortune to be an election observer in February, and there was a coalition of election observers from around the world, many from parliaments of other countries, and many of them were brand new to Indonesia, and they were just shocked at how diverse, how big, how complicated, and yet how successful. Like they're wrapping their heads around, like, if this country can do democracy, any country can do democracy. There's no country that's more sprawling, more diverse, speaks so many languages, different cultures, right. So there's a and if you look at some of the moral bankruptcy in the West, are sort of the subversionist foreign policy that many of in the Cold War that has been conducted. A country like Indonesia can really provide some really guidance, I think, to especially for ambitious or emerging countries or democracies. Like, hey, like we can do this. Like, some leadership and guidance in those ways. It was kind of interesting to watch that consensus among those people from around the world as they were exposed to, and they had a similar response that you had. And there's that. I think Indonesia is just beginning to figure out how much of its own natural resource, sort of intellectually, et cetera, that it can be a touchstone for other countries in the world to sort of think about. They don't have to follow only West. They can borrow from many places, and increasingly, I hope, Indonesia.
Thank you so much. Also, Dr. Jones, is there any other questions from the audience? So there is a questions, I think, from that we can see from the screen, audience virtually following us. Thank you so much. This is from Mario. This is a student. So this question is addressed to Dr. Vermonte. We know that Trump's policies has an impact on the Indonesian economy. Does this have relations with the Indonesian government's budget efficiency policy? Okay, this is actually the questions that I'm trying to avoid, but it's not coming from me as a moderator. Goodness. Okay. And also probably if you can also maybe from Dr. Jones and Dr. Durik can also explain a little bit about this whole Trump's trying to do with efficiency in the United States. Please, would you like to respond first?
If that the question, the answer is no. For Indonesia, this budget efficiency policy has been the main concern of the president since the campaign, and throughout 2024 on 2023 before the campaign, he had been repeatedly saying that this is going to be one area of his main policy improvement in the context of how to make budget more efficient. Of course, we know every country has limited budget. US, same thing. They have limited budget. Given the commitment, given the program, and so on, all countries have constrained budget. No country have unlimited budget. So every country tries to make it more efficient, make it more impactful, and creating more opportunities through this budget efficiency. One thing that I'd like to add as well is that when we're talking about budget efficiency policy, it doesn't mean it sounds like you cut, but it's actually no, you are reallocating. You are reallocating the budget through something that is in the view of the policymaker, Ministry of Finance, the president, and other ministries that you're just reallocating and reevaluating some areas where the government thinks needs more attention and needs to fit in with the plan and the objective at the new administration, because that's, I think, the whole idea of democracy. You have a new government, and then this new government, in every democracy, they have their policy plan, and maybe it's just that we need some times to make people understand. And if there's anything related to the US, is that if you if we go back to our history since 1998, we actually only have two and now three president that have been elected directly, because SBY served two terms, Pak Jokowi served two terms, and then Pak Prabowo just started. So we have a limited pool of policy reference. The US has a long history of direct presidential elections. They could go back to history and look at what are the similarities and differences, and how at that certain period of time the society responded to certain types of leaders, how our policies were put in the context in that time of period of certain president. And if I'm not mistaken, I read one piece in the Foreign Affairs during Trump first administration. There was this great article about Andrew Jackson, who was very similar to Trump right now. So, and then at that time, society, Congress, businesses responded to Andrew Jackson, and then it leads to the institutionalization of response and so on. So you have, the U.S. has this long history of presidents, and that's why the U.S. will be rebounding, if I can use the word, because they have these references. Now, for Indonesia, I think it's part of our learning curve as well as a nation, because we only have three presidents that have been elected directly in Indonesia, and that's why I think it requires a lot of understanding, patience, and then not to be too harsh on ourselves. Once again, that because this is a new policy and a new way of thinking that the president has been trying to put in front of the Indonesian citizen.
Borrowing from what Pak Alfred mentions, seeking for equilibrium takes time. May continue if you have any response from the US situations.
Sure. So this is speaking more from a citizen perspective, but government efficiency is a good thing. So I have a lot of pride in paying taxes. I have pride in the parks and the reason and all of the things that the federal taxes that I might pay go to. I also want tax money to be used appropriately. There have been a number of, even efficiencies about how things are done with electronic processes. It is a question of how should governments function in terms of implementing their programs in a way that does support efficiency and cost reduction when possible. And again, this is my personal perspective. I'm reluctant to think that I should say, I think that this needs to be done cautiously with some careful study. I'm uncomfortable personally with the speed with which the decisions have been made. So that's my personal perspective.
Thank you. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I mean, like, and Philip brings up a good point about, in the Indonesian case, like, yeah, not every ministry is happy about but it's a reallocation, right? It's a agree or disagree. It's a thoughtful assertion of a particular platform and a policy that a president or administration wants to enact. And in the case of the United States of this efficiency, it's just it's surgery, with a machete instead of a scalpel. It's thought, firing all the people who keep their nuclear reactors from exploding, just because, and then like, oh, we should have thought about that. Now we have to rehire them again, right? So there's so many examples of that's simply a hate hanging, sort of almost like the angry masses, giving them a sort of showing them you're doing what you said you would do. And I think it can't, just like the ignorance of you can't violate basic laws of economics, expect that that you can have tariffs and prices will go down. It's the same with these efficiencies. There are many, when people's clean water and access to and healthcare and school loans, when education or electrical access, when all those get sidelined, then you're going to have it's a very different operation that's happening in Indonesia than's happening in the United States.
Thank you so much. And I would like to perhaps ask Dr. Afri Madona to respond, but this is what we are seeing in the U.S. happening. And according to the U.S. Bar of Association, they said that the United States now, their constitution is under attack. So it talks about how Trump, those efficiency that's been forefronted by the Department of Government Efficiency, and how this oligarch seems to like tell this kind of like changes. I would like you to explain about how this contestation between legislative and also executive in the U.S. How do we make sense of this doctrine of separations of power that apparently Trump tried to break?
Yeah, thank you, Buratri. I think, this is a very political science things, right? But as far as I studied American government when graduate study, yes, Congress actually play a very powerful role, right? In the U.S., try to constrain, the executive power. But more recently, I think with the in domestic politics sides, polarization is much more extreme compared to foreign policy things. That's why we have what the so-called two presidencies thesis, right? In the study of American government, when you deal with foreign policy, then you tend to be Republican and Democrats tend to be united, but on issues on domestic policies, then they are quite hostile one another. But in general, Trump, even in the previous administration, shows, his hostility towards Congress. Right? I think it is because most of Republicans at the time still, at least a little bit, moderate, in terms of position, and that's why we see, almost every day there is a, what is exchange of words between McConnell and Trump, right? At the time, Trump says this, and then Connell says, the Republican leaders in the Senate says others, right? And then even with his own, vice president, he was in conflict, right? But now I don't know. Today it seems, more recently it seems that Republican seems to be, quite aligned with him, right? Yeah, I don't know. I remember our discussion with Tom, right? How he worried about the future. So yeah, I think with a more extreme right dispositions of some of the leadership in Congress, I think Trump is going to be even more bolstered in doing what he wanted to promise. He promised to his constituents. But I still believe that I remember what Paeg says, that we have experienced a lot of trouble in the past, so we're gonna survive. We will survive. And then yes, I agree with Pyric. Governance and democracy is two things closely inextricable, right? It cannot be separated, governance and democracy. If you are not competent in governance, then you will be punished by even your own constituents. So if the way Trump handle the problem in the next 3 to 4 years, then public will experience the goods and the bad things of his presidency, and then will punish if he failed to deliver what he promised.
Thank you so much. Is there any? We are in a position that's perhaps only a few more questions, one or two. Is there any question from the audience? Because it's like 3:12 already.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya Nutrida Mandica. Just wanna actually you can say question or maybe like just additional information. First of all, we know that Donald Trump has leadership characteristics. He likes to violate domestic law, and then at the same time creating global instability. So that's his character. So, but concerning budgets, actually in the U.S. government system and political system, Congress has a congressional budget office, and it's very strong. So even though executive try to insert and demanded budget cut, etc., they have to have the consultation with the Congress. So it has to be a win-win solution between executive and legislative. Cannot be on the executive side. In Indonesian model, like now Pak Prabowo is suddenly making a budget cut policy without consulting with the House, without consulting with the legislative. So this is kind of a different type of, because in Indonesia, budgetary power has mainly in the executive side. So he can just cut the budget without the consent budget already in the beginning of the year. He can just change in the middle, right? As far as I think he said, he thinks it doesn't harm the whole process of the government. I think that's a good thing. I'm teaching the budget policy, and I think what President Prabowo was doing now has to be done a long time ago, like 10 or 20 years ago, like budget efficiency, because in Indonesia, bureaucracy mostly spends 70% of the budget, the whole national budget. This is, for the artificial things and supporting their lives. That's one. Secondly, in terms of Indonesian position to the U.S., we have to understand that, in my opinion, in my observation, the U.S. actually never put Indonesia as a first priority in their international politics, except for in 1965 when the communist is very strong in the Southeast Asia, and Indonesia become buffer state for the communist influence. Otherwise, I think, like Dr. Philip saying, Indonesia is like a model, mostly a middle power, so doesn't try to insert ourselves in the uh, international conflicts. I think because of our how do you call it, foreign affairs policy, we are active. Uh, so we don't really side with one country. However, in terms of the U.S. right now, we have to be careful in two fold this year. First, trading. We don't have a very good relationship in terms of trade tariffs with the U.S. So U.S. try to do to to I think I saw this, U.S. tried to impose free trade with us, but they doesn't want to give us the same. So like a double standard kind of thing. U.S. doing it, because they think that he's too powerful. So he just want to do whatever to the developing country like us. Secondly, Donald Trump is mostly concerned about China. So he doesn't, China and Russia. So those two countries, he doesn't really pay attention, right? So this is, I told Eric yesterday, Eric, this is very dangerous. If Donald Trump doesn't consider the power of India and the power of Brazil and South Africa, and later we are in Indonesia. Because I just want to give David information, we are number 8 now in terms of economic power in the world. And then projectedly in 2045, we will be number 5, along with China, US, Russia, Brazil, and Indonesia. I think that's only that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bu Notrida, for your sharing perspective on Indonesia's relationship to the U.S. and how we should perceive Donald Trump and his approach to foreign policy. So this is now 3:17 already, and I would like to perhaps asking all the panelists to have their last comments in our discussions. But instead of giving comments, maybe this discussion is like take longer if you give comments. I would like to ask 3 words coming out of you, top of mind, about U.S.-Indonesia relations in terms of perhaps words that can strengthen our relationship or other things that can promote democracy or any other thing that's come up to your mind. Only 3 words, and I think that's about it. Start to think. Who wants to go first? Oh, okay, yeah. This should be encouraging, right?
explain my 3 words too?
Oh yeah. Please do so. So that will be wonderful. Okay. Please.
I think my 3 words would be lead on diversity. In thinking about something that Dr. Jones said earlier, I do think that there are many nations whose populace is much more homogenous than Indonesia. And it is very difficult to learn how to navigate differences of opinion, differences of background, ethnicity, language. In my limited experience in Indonesia, I certainly have appreciated the respect of different peoples and the fluidity and the comfort of people from different places is really remarkable. And I think that there is a lot the world can learn from the recognition and respect for diversity here in Indonesia. So lead on diversity.
Lead on diversity. That's wonderful. Other?
Short one,
Dr. Framonte?
3 words, negotiating mutual interest.
That's it? No explanation? Straightforward. Next.
Mine are strategic, autonomous, and global leadership. I think the strategic, which has been the pathway of the last two and the current president, I think are that it should a non-alignment is important, and then connected to an autonomous Indonesia should. The U.S. is going to think about its own interests, and as a future world leader country, like that's exactly what you should do. You should do as well. And there are points where those intersect, and then leadership. Really, it's as we hear the Azan right that like if you think about the incredible progressive view towards faith, towards Islam, the global leadership the role that it could have in that. It's just with your own religious ministers so high performing that there's an opportunity to really the the home of Islam may be in Mecca and Medina, but the heart is really in Asia. There are more Muslims in this island than there are in the entire Middle East combined, and your young population is shaping the leadership of women in the faith in society. Again, I think it's a great example for these Polish countries who are trying to figure out how to make it work, and Indonesia is another example of that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. Last but not least, please, Dr. Afri Madonna. Any explanation?
Yeah, I think Trump's promise to do whatever he wants to do, will create global resistance and even resistance among domestic politics, and hopefully I remember what is how we call this theory, theory pegas, how to say it in English, theory pegas. The more you pull it, and then the farther it will gone. So you need to be to understand that your ambitions will create something unpredictable, and then this will create resistance and fight back from others, and despite, but I think will create a new equilibrium when you are too progressive to the left, and then there will be somebody who will try to pull you back to the right, and this will end up in the middle, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, our Dr. Afri Madonna, for this good personification or metaphor. I think we are reaching the end of our discussion. I would like to thank all the panelists for the wonderful, amazing, insightful discussions, and hopefully it can enrich our understandings about how important our mutual understanding between Indonesia and then the United States and of course other countries. Thank you so much for the audience who's attending these discussions in persons or through the online platform. I would like to encourage probably further research about Indonesia and US relations. And before I end the discussion as a moderator, allow me to summarize a couple of takes from our discussion. So, borrowing from what Dr. Fermonte said, so we know China, we know the United States. The United States is the devil that we know, and China is the devil that we don't know. But come to realize that probably don't know anything about them at all. So how Indonesia should respond about that kind of situation? So we should be optimistic. That's from all the panels in here encouraging us to be optimistic because both situations probably should be responded wisely. We've been worse than this, right, Pyric? I think we can sail through or navigate these to come out from the crisis. And what Dr. Durik said, and this is really touching me by heart, bringing people together to the middle because we're losing the middle ground. We're losing the middle people. They are not so polarized and thinking on the level head and start to develop our countries, not destroying it. And democracy, from Dr. Afri Madonna, democracy is the one that we choose. So for better or worse, we have to be there and we sustain it because there's no other system perhaps that can offer a way that we can choose our leaders, hopefully in the rational way. And then coming up to what Dr. Fermonte said, and I totally agree what he said. So Indonesia stay in the middle power. We're not trying to be or replacing the major power. However, what he emphasized us, and I think he's also calling everybody, not only in the government, but from other institutions, and I think including education institutions, institutional building. That's really important. Stay to be true to itself. Indonesia should seek mutual understanding again with other countries, building a foreign policy approach, a non-aligned approach. It should be our number one priority to enhance our economic prosperity and our security, and also protecting our sovereignty. So perhaps that's the end of it. And thank you so much. And don't forget to follow our channel, YouTube channel, Populi Center. And also we have Instagram account. And this event sponsored by Kelangan Coffee. Thank you all. And hopefully we can meet each other again in a different event, Forum Populi. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Yeah.
Dr. Mampang, Dr. Durik, very nice.
Yeah,
Very nice introduction.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.